We all know the Galactic Empire was an evil regime of the Star Wars galaxy. However, it did ensure much needed stability for at least 15 years after the Clone Wars ended. But what went wrong for the Empire after its initial optimism to bring peace, prosperity and security to the galaxy? We are already probably thinking that Emperor Palpatine was simply evil along with many of his closest supporters, and you would be right about that. However, the Emperor did want to deliver peace for the galaxy, but the problem with Palpatine's version of this, that was his imperial laws were too divisive, too restrictive, and too changeable without warning. Immediately after the Clone Wars ended, Imperial troopers marched through the streets of worlds, all too happy to embrace the Empire as their saviour from the chaos of 4 years of war against the Separatists. But their optimism was short, as the Empire swiftly introduced imperial laws which were intended to control their imperial populace. Unfortunately for the new imperial citizens and the freedoms of their existence during the Galactic Republic times, justice was not at the heart of imperial law. The Empire simply expected everyone to obediently comply with their stringent authority. An imperial chain code was a type of identification marker that contained biographical information on an individual. The system was sold to citizens as required to allow access to public services from the imperial state. Although many citizens willingly participated, the Empire would abuse this system to track movements of citizens and brutally change their laws to suit the galactic pressures they faced. The Empire's legal system would often contradict itself by applying its laws to less favourable worlds and citizens, while at the same time turning a blind eye to favoured worlds, particularly in the core regions of the galaxy centred around Coruscant, renamed as Imperial Centre. As the Emperor and the government's policy was to favour humans over alien races, unless a concession was granted, the Empire brutally handled the Outer Rim and used slavery to support their imperial projects. Corruption within the Empire was rife, where imperial officials were open to bribery for the right price, which was often the difference between applying the law or not. Across the galaxy, individual societies held their own local customs and legal frameworks, which would determine cultural behaviours, and these would be tolerated as long as they did not infringe upon imperial law. But imperial law would overrule any local laws if required by the local planetary governor, magistrate, or sector moff. In cases where the Empire's expansion campaign did not reach areas of the galaxy beyond their direct control, the imperial government created a system in which worlds far from the core regions could be governed by private security forces. For example, the corporate authority seen in Andor Season 1 was the Milana system's subcontracted law enforcement on behalf of the Galactic Empire. As a private security force, they endeavoured to oversee crime rates and report them to the local imperial authorities. Ultimately, imperial law was not designed to protect everyday citizens. Instead, it worked to protect the imperial state. Eventually, imperial law became a strain on worlds, particularly outside the favoured inner regions of the galaxy, resulting in private security forces bearing the brunt of intrusive imperial regulations. Where small uprisings began, the imperial authorities were forced to intervene, and in some cases install a garrison to ensure local populations fell in line with the Empire's rules and regulations. However, the sight of an imperial stormtrooper or security trooper on the streets of a town, and far from imperial centre, only served a blunt reminder of the Empire's rule, and not the solution for a sustainable local government. For the majority of the Empire's rule over the galaxy, this system was in place, with occasional interventions from imperial military and security forces. However, this tended to fuel overzealous behaviour by the local security forces, fearing that imperial rule would remove them and take control. Despite all of this, large swathes of the galaxy would go about their daily lives with very little regard for who was governing the galaxy or indeed their local system. However, imperial law was never very far away from affecting their lives, as the Empire's forever changing challenges affected their application of the law. For instance, the imperial legal system consisted of 5 classes of illegal activity and would be judged by local magistrates inside courtrooms. Judgments upon any crimes committed would be severe against vandalism to imperial property, including damage to images of Emperor Palpatine himself. The local imperial governors would exercise their own judgment to setting any punishments. By 5 BBY, the justice system was changed to invoke the Public Order Resentencing Directive to impose harsher sentences, especially for Class 1 offences deemed as anti-imperial crimes. Cassian Andor fell victim himself to the Empire's brutal resentencing order, and was imprisoned for crimes that he did not commit, but were deemed as anti-imperial. What is even more interesting about this period was how imperial authorities simply treated thefts and serious raids as simply criminal acts. This provides the narrative that the Empire was drunk on its own power and authority, with untouchability from any serious threat to its rule. The reality was very different, and a network of rebellion was allowed to grow into a serious problem for the Imperial Intelligence Services and the military to deal with. By 0 BBY, the Empire was facing real threats to their authority, and Grand Moff Tarkin's doctrine of ruling by fear to deter the growing rebellion was accelerated, with the introduction of the Death Star, the dissolution of the Imperial Senate, and complete control over galactic regions by Imperial sector Moffs. As the Empire's grip tightened, the rebellion dealt its most serious blow to Imperial power when the first Death Star was destroyed, undermining Emperor Palpatine's authority. In 9 ABY, after the fall of the Empire, the Imperial officer known as the Client in Moff Gideon's Imperial Remnant asked Din Djarin why Mandalore resisted Imperial rule. The Client made the case that the Empire improved every system it touched, judged by any metric: safety, prosperity, trade, opportunity, and peace. He gave his observation that comparing Imperial rule to the present, he saw nothing but death and chaos. The Imperial officer was referring to the fact that the New Republic was not providing the galaxy with the same stability and prosperity in which the Empire provided. However, although the Empire provided this stability, many within the galaxy hated their legal system due to its tight and sometimes brutal controls upon their lives, dependent on who they were or where they lived. What are your thoughts on the Empire's legal system, and also on the case that the Client made to Din Djarin? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching.